In June 1942, one of the most disastrous Allied naval defeats took place in the Arctic Ocean, where a convoy bound to Russia suffered a nearly 70% casualty rate among its civilian ships, and it threatened the supply lines to the Soviet Union. But before we go too far into the history of this, let me start by introducing you to this video and another audio and visual extravaganza. Hello, my name is Andy's Model and Stuff, and welcome to the channel. So, as you can see here, I started out with this model of a Liberty ship. I built this thing when I was 15 years, I think, and I painted it in an absolutely horrible color, which is why I have recently primed it, as you can see here, just to make the details pop a bit more and hide the dreadful camo scheme that I put on it. Didn't really know what they were doing at the time, but this will be massively improved when it's done with. I can't remember where I got this kit from, but as you can see, it's very detailed, and it went together very well, as far as I can remember at least. But there were loads of details missing on the ship when I started building it, so I just had to make up some things as I went along, and I robbed some parts from other kits that I had laying around, for instance my Dreadnought kit that will never be completed, and other bits and bobs like that. I've taken quite a liking to refurbishing my older kits and giving them a new paint job like this, and as you can see, it doesn't turn out half bad. I'm very pleased with this thing actually, and I just add all sorts of other details on it, like these small sailors and a lot of washers and rust pigments and things like this. For instance, this ship hadn't been weathered at all before, and now I just apply some washers on it just to make it look a lot better than it usually was. Instead of buying a new kit, I just find that refurbishing these old things from when I was, well, 10 years younger, it just gives me a lot of more joy out of the same kit, because they're not very good, I'm not happy with them, but being able to just give them a new paint job and hey ho, they look smashing again, feels nice. I might have gone overboard on the weathering with this ship, but it was quite simply done actually. I just covered the entire ship piece by piece with enamel thinners and just added on some rusting from AK streaks and quite heavily rusting all over the place. I've seen some images of ships on the Arctic convoys. They weren't always properly maintained because a lot of the crew had the well, I hesitate to say foresight, but they were expecting their ships to be sunk at any time anyway, so why do preventive maintenance on them like painting? So it looks a bit rough and ready, but that's the way I want it. So to make the ships truly come alive, I decided to go for the oldest trick in my book to add some life and add some character to it. So I used this, which might be familiar to some of you who've been with my channel for, well, years now. And I used some styrofoam blocks, which I'm going to cover in a piece of paper to make it look like cargo that has been stacked on the deck. And here I'm just experimenting with all sort of different shapes of cargo and things, but I ended up with these shapes like this. They're square, they're quite simple, they're easy to cover up, and I made them in some different sizes, and just to give them a bit of variety, I added some blocks on top of some of them, and yeah, just to make them not look so uniform, just added a mixture of 50% water and PVE glue, and just cover the entire thing in that, let it soak, and hey ho, you'll have something that looks like a crate. Very simple technique. If you want to have a go at it in further detail, I've made a video on this before. It's probably the most popular video on my channel, so head over there and check it out if you like to. Now I for one think that the cargo on the ship makes it look a lot better. It looks a lot more alive, it looks a bit more realistic, and I think it helps tremendously, but there are still loads of things we can do to make the ship pop a bit more, like for instance adding sailors, like this. These are 1/350 scale sailors, and they were I don't know if they were a pleasure or a nightmare to paint these, but the result at least was absolutely spectacular. I painted some of them in different colors, some of them are just in one pieces, and I painted some skin tones on them, but other ones are in, well, what's supposed to be a complete naval uniform, with hats and everything and different colours on their shoes. And I just placed these randomly all over the ship because, well, merchant sailors would just have the clothes that they wanted to. There were no uniforms and things like that, but on the gun crew, on most of the guns, they have a uniform, like for instance these two with white and blue, or with green overalls. But here's the thing: if you want to make a convoy diorama with ships of the 1920s, 1940s era, there is a limited number of kits out there for you to choose from. I've already shown you the available kits that I have, the Liberty ship and the oil tanker SO Glasgow that took part in my previous convoy diorama. So here I'm introducing to you something completely new to me. This is a 3D printed ship, and as you can see, the details on it are not perfect at all. It's a very rough shape, but you can't really say that it doesn't look like a early 1920s cargo ship. And with all of these extra bits like hoists and davits and all sort of little details, once you start putting all this thing on, it kind of looks like a decent ship after all. It could very well be a commerce raider, maybe, but I've chosen to use this thing as a basis for a British 1920s, early 30s civilian merchant ship. And even though the details aren't perfect on this, there is a lot of room to work with there. And once again, I come to my trusty pile of parts, like again the HMS Dreadnought kit that will never be finished, and I just stole loads of pieces from that. But I also bought these things. I bought literally truckloads of 1/350 scale armoured vehicles and trucks and support vehicles to put on the deck on both ships. And also this thing, which is quite impressive, a whole locomotive. And when I got all these things on the deck, as you can see here, they're beautifully detailed, absolutely stunning little things. I'll put a link to where I got them from on screen, and all of these things turn out to be absolutely perfect. Just put them on the deck, and yeah, the cargo and the ships come alive so perfectly well. And yeah, these things were just great. I used a olive drab paint job on all of them. Simply, yeah, you just need to hang on to them so they don't pop away. I painted the tracks and the wheel with a dark grey, so that you can see that there are at least some difference on them. And the train as well, just very simple, a light coat of dark grey, and yeah, that was the cargo complete, more or less at least. Let's just assemble them and see. So the good thing now was that all the tanks and all the trucks and all the jeeps have been painted, but as it happens, I'd ordered double the amount that I was going to actually have. So I have twice the number. I think I had 3 times the number of Sherman tanks that I actually needed, and a truckload of Studebakers. But you know, that's actually fine, because I now both have the Studebakers and the GMC, is that what they're called? So I have 2 different types of trucks, 2 different manufacturers, so you know, it's not all bad. There's a hell of a lot of painting left to do. So yeah, it turned out absolutely stunning, I think. The tanks and the trucks and the jeeps and the train, they just completed this build in such a good way, and I'm very pleased with how things turn out. But I think we're at the point now where I should start talking about the story of this diorama, because there is this diorama is based on the PQ17 convoy. I suppose many of you already got that from seeing the tanks and how they were placed. I won't go through the entire story here because way more skilled people than me have already talked about PQ17 in detail on YouTube, but the shortage would be important just to give you the highlights at least. PQ17 was the code name of an Arctic convoy during the Second World War, where 35 merchant ship under a heavy escort of warships left for the port of Archangels in the Soviet Union. The convoy was found by German forces, and the British Admiralty believed that the German battleship Tirpitz would leave port to attack the convoy, and they feared that the escort of the convoy would not be able to handle the German warships and its escort, so it was decided that the convoy was to scatter and that the supporting warships were to withdraw. This left the merchant ships horribly exposed and extremely vulnerable to German submarines and aircraft attack, and as a result, over 65% of the merchant ships were sunk and over 135 merchant sailors were killed. It eventually turned out that the Tirpitz never left port, and that the scattering of the convoy was an absolute mistake, and it didn't happen again ever after PQ17. But there are some interesting details about PQ17 and some extremely heroic men and episodes that I thought should be highlighted, and this diorama is going to pay tribute to one of the stories of courage and just facing absolutely hopeless odds. Because on receiving the orders of scattering the convoy, there were some who didn't feel that that would be the right decision under the circumstances. For instance, a Lieutenant Leo Gradwell, who was commanding an anti-submarine trawler, HMS Ashaya, decided that he did not want to go for Archangels and decided to take his little convoy of his trawler and 3 other merchant vessels called Troubadour, the Ironclad and Silver Sword, and he took them northward, reaching the Arctic ice and pushed into the ice. In the ice they stopped their engines and decided to paint the ships entirely white to camouflage them. They covered the decks of the ship with linen, and they arranged all their tanks, because they had Sherman tanks stacked on the decks, into a defensive formation and loaded their main guns. Because if the Tirpitz would show up, the least it would expect was 75mm high explosive fired from the barrel of Sherman tanks. So, amazingly, this little convoy stayed in the ice, and after a period of waiting, they evaded Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft, eventually finding themselves unstuck and able to proceed to Archangel, where they arrived on the 25th of July. All 4 ships of this little convoy arrived unscathed, and I just think this story is so absolutely remarkable and amazing that I just felt like I had to do a little diorama on it. So that's what I've done. The trawler in my last video is supposed to represent HMS Ashaya, and the Liberty ship and this 3D printed ship are supposed to represent the other ships in the convoy. The story of PQ17 is a story of making an absolute sacrifice in facing overwhelming odds and trying to come to grips with a hopeless situation where you are absolutely overmatched. And although the little convoy of Lieutenant Leo Gradwell made it to port, there were a lot of other civilian ships that did not make it. 34 civilian ships left Iceland and 23 of them were sunk. About 200 tons of supplies were supposed to be delivered to the Soviet Union, but 70,000 tons went down with the ship. Winston Churchill called the entire event one of the most melancholy naval episodes in the whole war, and American Admiral Dan Gallery, serving in the US Navy at the time, called PQ17 a shameful page in naval history. So, if you are the least interested in history and not just modelling, I would absolutely recommend you looking into the history of PQ17 a bit further. It's an absolutely amazing story, and there are loads of good videos on it here on YouTube, so yeah, go check it out. However, in the meantime, what's happened with the model? Well, this is what I've been up to. I have made the base of the diorama, and I've filled it in with epoxy resin. I've done this in several layers. I made the frame and the styrofoam, and then I put on these plastic walls all around it, just to make sure that I can pour the resin in safely, and I poured in several thin layers just to make sure it doesn't flow out everywhere, and it worked very well, no leaks. But with the sea looking realistic enough, how about the ice? Well, this is how I decided to do it, and some of you might recognize this. This is cat litter, or at least it's the cat litter sand that's supposed to go in the tray. But it turns out it's worked absolutely perfectly to representing small icebergs and floating ice. So I just used these little pieces. They have the right color already, and I just spread them around randomly. I looked at some reference photos. I'll put one up on screen now if I can remember doing that. And yeah, just random patterns of sort of well, not uniform sizes, just randomly spread all around. And then I poured on one last layer of epoxy resin that had been mixed with a bit thinner paint, but because I wanted you to be able to see through at least the surface of the water, so you can see that the iceberg are going a bit down into the water. You can't see the bottom of the hulls of any of the ship apart from the trawler. Bit of a mistake on my part, but hey ho, it's not super important. I just wanted to realize that this was a very ballsy move of me, just pouring the resin in all over like this. I should have taken more care, not spilling on the ships and not spilling on where it was supposed to go, but it turned out that I was able to be very precise, and nothing ended up on the models, and very little ended up on the floating icebergs as well. And as you can see here, it turned out to be, well, I think at least, very, very good. And yeah, as you can see on the ship in the back there, it's partially painted white already because, well, the crew got to work early on. So the next thing I do after this thing has set is to get this product, this gel, which I use to create waves and a bit more uneven surface on the water. Turns out very well. I just use one of these kind of stiff brushes that I have laying around that's not really useful for anything else, and I tried not getting too much water on the icebergs themselves. I just went to go around them so it looks like the water is washing up against them, and I think I successfully pulled up this effect quite good. I had to use quite more liberal amount of it just around the ships because, well, the water could be a bit more turbulent around the engines if maybe the propellers are going around at minimum speed or something, and also just making it a bit more coming a bit more to life. I think this worked out really, really well. I tried also to use a straw and blow, so it looks like the wind is blowing the water in one direction. That didn't really work, so maybe I'd have to use an airbrush or a small compressor to pull on that effect. But just using this brush to make random scatter pattern also, I feel at least, worked very, very well. So this is what it looks like before it dries up, and as you can see, very liberal amounts in places, and once this all dries, it turns out very, very nicely. So yeah, I was a bit scared at this point, but once it dried up, perfect, absolutely perfect. So after all of that was done, I disassembled the frame I built around diorama. I fixed this with the hot glue gun, and it came apart very nicely. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I've never had luck with resin before, but on this build it worked very nicely. I then finished the base by putting on these strips of balsa wood, which I then used these little needles to just pin into place so that I had a nice surface. And also I finished up with a few remaining details, like these little crewmen hard at work painting the ship. And for the final details, there were the question of cargo, and I had an entire box of things just laying around there after all the things have been painted. So now was the time to start putting on everything, and I just glued these big boxes of cargo in their assigned places. I had test fitted these probably lightly 100 times just to find out where they would fit and where they would look the best. And I made loads of these little crate things as well, because I wasn't perfectly happy with the shape of them. They didn't properly fit, but these ones that I decided to go for, I felt like could be somewhat realistic, so I just used the wood glue to glue them on, because hot glue or anything else super glue would just melt the styrofoam. So they stayed on somewhat at least, and it doesn't really matter that the wood glue pops out on one side. It's just it looks like snow, it's fine. But on the resin parts, super glue is no problem. So on this train, for instance, I put this on in the middle of the Liberty ship because I wanted it to be sort of an eye catcher on the deck. And very, very happy with the train. It's super simple paint job, but still, yeah, looks really nice. And also, these are the Sherman tanks that got the turrets swung around to one side and are prepared to receive the turbines or any other threats that might be appearing. And also these things, yeah, look fantastic. Absolutely great little pieces of kit. So once that was done, just follow up with more Sherman tanks, more jeeps, more trucks, and I try to fill in the space on the deck as much as possible just to make it look cluttered, to make it look properly stacked, and getting all the supplies I possibly could on there. And I have to say, I really think that the ships come alive with the little figures and the little vehicles and everything. So yeah, super happy about that, and I'd be happy to hear your feedback in the comments. What do you think about this? I think they look fantastic with the little jeeps and the sailors and everything, and the icebergs. The water turned out really good with the waves and everything. Could have done more with the rigging and everything, obviously, but all in all, I think this turned out to be very, very nice with all the details, and it tells the story that I wanted to tell about the little trawler that could, and the convoy hiding in the Arctic, painting themselves white and preparing for battle. But anyway, this is the finished model. I hope you like it. Please leave a like if you did, and I'll see you in the next video.